Clausson, Stevenson and Conan Doyle, Degeneration and the Blurring of Gothic Fiction with the Detective Story. Hello and welcome to the screencast. Over the next 5 minutes we will be examining Nils Clausson's ideas on the theme of degeneration in Gothic and detective fiction. We will then be looking at R.L. Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles in order to see how this theme of degeneration begins to blur the distinction between the two genres. But first we are going to briefly outline the anthropological context around the fear of degeneration and the theories of Cesar Lombroso. Following Darwin's theory of evolution, a fear of degeneration grew. There was a concern that if mankind can evolve, then mankind could also potentially regress and revert back to earlier evolutionary stages. Lombroso suggested that the criminal is a distinct anthropological type. Criminal Man states, "If we examine a number of criminals, we shall find that they exhibit numerous anomalies in the face, skeleton, and various psychic and sensitive functions, so that they strongly resemble primitive races." Lombroso argued that, as a type, criminals were born as criminals and are examples of atavism, not only in the physical sense, but also in terms of morality, suggesting that criminal tendencies are of atavistic origin. We can see this fear of regression and degeneration throughout the literature of the time, both in the works of Gothic fiction and in what Clausson has dubbed the modern detective story. Clausson challenges the orthodoxy that Holmes is the embodiment of the Victorian belief in the ability of reason to reduce even the most baffling mystery to a commonplace. He argues that this orthodoxy ignores the important relation between the emergence of the Holmesian detective story and two contemporary developments: the revival of the Gothic and the introduction of the previously discussed criminal anthropology into England. When discussing The Hound of the Baskervilles, Clausson examines the explanation of the crimes being this idea of degeneration. He argues that degeneration is a theme characteristic of the Gothic, but also an idea being widely accepted as scientific theory due to the work of Lombroso and his contemporaries. Because of this scientific acceptance of anthropological criminology, we see the theme of degeneration bridging the gap between Gothic fiction and detective stories and blurring the distinction of the two genres to create, as Clausson dubs, the modern detective story. We will continue to look at Stevenson's Gothic story of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and an example of what Clausson considers to be a modern detective story, Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles. I agree with Clausson that we see elements of the Gothic entering the detective fiction. However, one must remember that the resolution of the Hound of the Baskervilles is not supernatural at all. The legend of the curse of the Baskervilles remains just that, merely an unproved legend. The killer proves to be a murderous man and a dog painted with phosphorus paint. And whilst one explanation, or as Clausson words it, the alternative explanation, of the crimes may be degeneration, we cannot ignore other explanations. Stapleton is unarguably a man motivated by greed and financial gain. He wishes to inherit the Baskerville estate and must kill to do so. But the reader learns of previous crimes he has committed without needing to resort to such drastic measures. He purloined a considerable sum of public money in South America and also acted as a masked and solitary burglar in the West Country. It is interesting to see how, although Clausson is arguing that it is elements of the Gothic entering the more typically scientific-based fiction, which is bridging the gap between the two genres, we nonetheless see the theme of detection entering the Gothic, with Utterson on the case of the strange Mr. Hyde, and also of science. As Clausson explains, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde serves as a warning against the danger of science, with the biggest scientific breakthrough, or progression, occurring parallel to Jekyll's dreadful atavistic change in identity and degeneration. Similarly to The Hound of the Baskervilles, we see the theories of Lombroso entering fiction. A writer explains, "From the first publication of Stevenson's novel, readers have noticed similarities between Lombroso's criminal and the atavistic Mr. Hyde." To conclude, although we see elements of both genres appearing in the other, I disagree that the new genre of modern detective story is created with Hound of the Baskervilles. As previously discussed, the resolution has a very natural explanation of greed and phosphorus paint. I also think that to create this new branch of detective fiction means to neglect the impact in turn on the Gothic genre, with its new element of scientific explanation rather than supernatural. Thank you for listening.